Say your name out loud right now. Say it the way you normally would. Just your name, spoken once at your normal volume. You just heard it. Clear, familiar, yours. Now here is what happened. Two completely different signals arrived at your cochlea simultaneously. The first traveled through the air, exited your mouth, curved around your head, and entered your ear canal. The second never left your body. It traveled through the bones of your skull at 3,000 meters per second, 9 times faster than the air-conducted signal, and arrived at your inner ear through a pathway no external listener has access to. The signal that traveled through bone carried frequencies the air-conducted signal did not. Specifically, it carried lower frequencies more efficiently, adding roughly 6 decibels of bass energy that no microphone and no other human being will ever detect from your voice. You heard both signals merged into one perception. Everyone else in the room heard only one, the air-conducted version, the version without the bass, the version that sounds thinner, higher, and less substantial than the voice inside your head. That version, the one without the bone, is what a recording captures. The voice you hear on a recording is not a distortion. It is the only version of your voice that physically exists outside your skull. Georg von Békésy quantified this in 1949 at Harvard. He measured the loudness of self-perceived voice with and without the air-conducted component. When he blocked the air pathway, self-perceived loudness dropped by approximately 6 decibels, which means bone conduction contributes roughly half of what you hear when you speak. Half. Not a subtle coloring, not a slight warmth. Half of the signal that defines how you perceive your own voice comes through a pathway that exists only inside your head. By the end of this video, you will understand why the voice you have known your entire life is a signal that only you receive, why a recording strips half of it away, why your brain cannot recognize the remainder, and what that reveals about how self-perception is physically constructed. This is not psychology. This is acoustics. And the acoustics are stranger than you think. Your skull is not a single uniform conductor of sound. When your vocal folds vibrate, they set in motion a chain of structures. The vibration propagates from the laryngeal cartilage through the hyoid bone, through the mandible, through the temporal bone, and into the cranial vault. Stefan Stenfelt and Richard Good cataloged 5 distinct pathways through which bone-conducted vibration reaches the cochlea. 5 simultaneous mechanisms, each contributing a different component of the signal you hear. The first is sound radiation into the ear canal. The vibrating skull actually re-radiates sound into your own ear canal from the walls of the canal itself. You are hearing your own skull generate sound inside your ear. The second is middle ear inertia. The ossicular chain, the 3 smallest bones in your body, the malleus, incus, and stapes vibrates relative to the surrounding temporal bone. The skull moves, but the ossicles lag behind due to their inertia, and that relative motion stimulates the cochlea exactly as external sound does. The third is cochlear fluid inertia. The skull vibration causes the fluid inside the cochlea to slosh relative to the bony walls. The basilar membrane deflects, hair cells fire, you hear. The fourth is cochlear wall compression. The bony shell of the cochlea itself physically compresses and expands with each vibration cycle, creating pressure differences across the basilar membrane. The fifth is cerebrospinal fluid transmission. Vibrations propagate through the CSF surrounding the brain and reach the cochlea through a fluid pathway entirely separate from the bone pathway. 5 mechanisms, running in parallel every time you speak. And here is the critical detail. Each mechanism transmits different frequencies with different efficiencies. Low frequencies propagate through bone with less attenuation than through air. This is not interpretation. It is the physics of wave propagation through solid versus gaseous media. Solids transmit low-frequency vibrations more efficiently because the wavelengths are long relative to the molecular spacing of the medium. Your skull is a low-pass filter. It preferentially transmits the lower frequencies of your voice while allowing the higher frequencies to attenuate. The result is a bass boost that exists only inside your head. No one else receives it, no microphone captures it, no recording preserves it. Sabine Reinfeldt and colleagues at Chalmers University measured exactly how much this bass boost varies by the specific sounds you make. When you produce nasal sounds, M or N, The bone-conducted component is approximately 12 decibels louder than the air-conducted component in the 1 to 2 kilohertz range. When you produce back vowels like O, the bone-conducted component peaks at 15 decibels above the air-conducted signal at 2 kilohertz. Your voice sounds different to you depending on which phonemes you are producing. Not slightly different, measurably, dramatically different. This means something specific that most people have never considered. The word morning sounds more different between your internal perception and the recording than the word this does. The nasal consonants in morning carry far more bone-conducted energy than the fricatives in this. Your voice does not have one discrepancy with reality. It has a phoneme-dependent discrepancy that changes with every syllable. Now here is where the neuroscience deepens the problem. Because your brain does not passively listen to your own voice, it actively suppresses its response to it. When you speak, your motor cortex sends a prediction signal called an efference copy to your auditory cortex. This prediction tells the auditory system what sound is about to arrive. If the incoming sound matches the prediction, the auditory cortex suppresses its response. The neural marker for this suppression is a measurable reduction in what neuroscientists call the N1 component, an early electrical signature of sound processing. Dean Flinker and colleagues at UC Berkeley recorded this directly using electrocorticographic electrodes implanted in neurosurgical patients. They observed that during vocalization, specific regions of auditory cortex showed significant suppression of activity compared to when the same speech was played back externally. Your brain is literally turning down its own hearing when you speak. The suppression is not random. It is calibrated to the expected signal. Roosbe Beruzmond and Charles Larson at Northwestern showed that auditory suppression is largest when voice feedback is unaltered, zero pitch shift, and progressively decreases as the pitch shift increases. At 400 cents of pitch shift, suppression was almost completely eliminated. Your brain maximally suppresses the response to exactly the voice it expects to hear. The more the signal deviates from expectation, the more the brain wakes up and pays attention. Now consider what happens when you press play on a recording of yourself. The signal arriving at your ears is missing the bone-conducted component. Half the signal is gone. The bass is stripped. The frequencies are shifted. The prediction your motor cortex spent decades building the template of what your voice sounds like does not match. The suppression mechanism fails. Your auditory cortex responds to your own recorded voice the way it would respond to a stranger's voice. Full processing, no attenuation, no familiar dampening. The voice is treated as novel input. This is the neurological basis of the wrongness. It is not just that the recording sounds different. It is that your brain processes it differently. The efference copy system, which normally tells your auditory cortex, "This is you," suppress the response, cannot recognize the air-only signal as self-generated. The bone-conducted component was part of the template. Without it, the template does not match. The suppression does not fire. You hear yourself as someone else. Pinheiro and colleagues published a finding that makes this even more precise. Due to bone and air conduction filtering effects, the fundamental frequency you physically generate is measurably different from the fundamental frequency you subjectively perceive as your own voice. Your brain maintains two voice templates, the objective pitch of your vocal folds and the subjective pitch created by the bone-filtered signal. Participants showed changed deafness, inability to detect small pitch changes around both frequencies. Your brain has encoded two versions of your voice. The real one and the one physics builds inside your skull. Both feel like you. The recording matches neither. In 1966, Philip Holzman and Clyde Rousey at the Menninger Foundation conducted the first systematic study of what they called voice confrontation. They played recordings of participants' own voices back to them and observed consistent negative emotional responses. Speech hesitations increased. Self-attributions became unfavorable. Participants displayed measurable affective disturbance. But the disturbance was not just about pitch. Holzman and Rousey found that recordings revealed what they called extra-linguistic cues, aspects of personality the speakers were completely unaware of expressing. Anxiety levels, indecision, sadness, anger, qualities embedded in the voice that the bone-conducted signal masked. The recordings did not just sound wrong. They revealed information the speaker did not know they were broadcasting. The disruption came from what Holzman and Rousey described as sudden confrontation with expressive qualities in the voice which the subject had not intended to express and which they were not aware they had expressed. Your voice carries your emotional state to everyone who hears it. Everyone except you. Because your internal perception, enriched by bone conduction, smooths over the very qualities that others perceive most clearly. A follow-up study by Rousey, Holzman, and Snyder in 1967 produced perhaps the most striking number in voice perception research. When participants were played recordings of their own voice among recordings of other voices, only 38% could identify their own voice within 5 seconds. 38%. You have heard your own voice every day of your life. Through the bone-conducted pathway, you have listened to it more than any other sound in existence. And when presented with the version everyone else hears, the air-conducted version, the recording, the real acoustic signal, you fail to recognize it nearly 2/3 of the time. This is not a failure of attention. It is a failure of template matching. The voice you know, the one you have heard since before you could speak, since your first babbling transmitted through the bones of your infant skull, is a physically different signal from the voice that exists in the world, and the gap between them is large enough that recognition fails. Now follow this to its deepest implication. Because the bone-conducted pathway is not a human invention, it is not a quirk of mammalian anatomy. Bone conduction is the original hearing mechanism. It predates the ear canal, the tympanic membrane, and the ossicular chain by hundreds of millions of years. Whales and dolphins have no external ear opening. They receive sound through their lower jaw bones, which channel vibrations through specialized fat-filled acoustic channels directly to the inner ear. Fish detect sound through their entire body, with vibrations propagating through tissue and bone to the otolith organs. The vertebrate hearing system began as bone conduction. Air conduction through an ear canal is the later addition, an evolutionary refinement for detecting airborne sound in terrestrial environments. Your skull retains the ancient system. The voice in your head, the deeper, richer, bass-enhanced version, arrives through a pathway that evolution built 400 million years before it built the ear canal. The recording captures the newer pathway, the one that evolved for listening to others, the one that was never designed for listening to yourself. This means something about self-perception that physics forces you to confront. The recording is not a distortion of your voice. Your internal perception is the distortion. It is a bass-boosted, bone-filtered, skull-resonated version of an acoustic signal that physics constructs inside your head through 5 simultaneous mechanisms that no external observer can access. The voice you have heard your entire life, the one you recognize as yours, the one you built your identity around, the one that feels like you, is a signal that exists nowhere in the physical world except inside your own skull. The moment it leaves your mouth, the bone component vanishes. What remains is the air-conducted signal, the recording, the version you do not recognize, the version that is acoustically the only real one. You began this video by saying your name out loud. 2 signals arrived at your cochlea, one through air, one through bone. You heard them merged. Everyone else heard only one. The merge created a voice that does not exist outside your body. The voice others know you by the one they have always heard, the one they would recognize anywhere, is a voice you have never heard as they hear it. The physics does not allow it. Bone conduction is unidirectional. It flows from your vocal folds to your cochlea through your skull. It cannot be extracted, recorded, or transmitted. The voice inside your head will die when you do. No recording will ever capture it. No other person will ever hear it. It is the most private sound in existence, a signal that physics builds for an audience of one. The recording is not wrong. The recording is everyone else's experience of you, preserved exactly as they hear it. The voice in your head is the private version enriched by ancient bone, filtered through your own skull, perceived through a pathway older than terrestrial hearing itself. You have been listening to a physically altered version of yourself for your entire life, and you built your identity around it. That is not a flaw in recording technology. That is the physics of self-perception, operating exactly as the anatomy requires.